She walked calmly down the sidewalk. She wore a simple sweatshirt, a flat cap and a backpack on her back, walking with her head down, with firm steps. From a distance, she gave the impression of being just another woman, returning home after a normal day. But that morning, nothing would be normal. Suddenly, 2 police cars slowed down next to her. Without warning, 2 police officers got out of the car, one of them already with his hand on his gun. The approach was curt, direct, disrespectful. "Show me your hands, pull over right now!" Evelyn didn't understand at the time. She was alone, empty-handed, doing nothing that would justify such aggression. But she didn't have time to ask. In seconds, she was put against the wall, handcuffed, humiliated. What those men didn't know, and didn't even bother to know, was that the woman they were treating like a criminal was one of the most important people in the national security of the United States. What began with laughter and contempt would end with destroyed careers and a lesson that no one there would ever forget. It was a clear, quiet morning in Arlington, like so many others Evelyn Carter had experienced. The city seemed on autopilot, cafes opening, residents rushing about, the distant sound of sirens. Evelyn, in her grey sweatshirt cap and light backpack, walked calmly down the sidewalk of a neighborhood where she knew every crack. For her, it was just another day. She left early to buy a few things, as she always did on her day off. Nothing about her stood out, not in her posture, not in the way she walked, not in her clothes. Nothing, except the color of her skin. As she turned a corner, Evelyn saw a parked police car. She paid no attention, drove by calmly, looking straight ahead. But within a few seconds, the strange feeling was confirmed. The car started and followed her slowly. She looked out of the corner of her eye without turning her head. She felt the weight of the forced observation until the dry sound of the short siren came. An order. "Hey ma'am, pull over here for a moment." Evelyn stopped and turned to the police officer who had gotten out of the car with a hard expression, his hand near his belt. "Did something happen, officer?" "Identification, please." She frowned, but didn't question it. Calmly, she opened her jacket pocket and took out her wallet. She handed it over firmly. The officer stared at her for a long time. His partner, still in the patrol car, watched with a smirk. "Evelyn." "Carter," the officer murmured. "And what are you doing here?" "Going to the grocery store. I live 2 blocks away," she replied calmly. "What about this backpack, guys? Just food and some simple things. Can I see?" She hesitated, not because she had anything to hide, but because she knew where this was going. It was always the same. The tone of voice, the suspicious look, the way his eyes roamed her body as if searching for something wrong, something dangerous, something that would justify the discomfort her presence caused. "You can," she said, holding out her backpack. The policeman searched everything right there on the sidewalk. He found bread, a bottle of water, a notebook, and a book. Nothing else. "Where are you coming from?" "From home. I walked to the market." "And where are you going?" "Back home. Like I said, I live nearby." The police officer closed the backpack and handed it back, but he didn't hand over the documents. He just looked at her thoughtfully. "What do you do for a living?" Evelyn held back a small urge to respond sarcastically. She took a deep breath. "I work in security." He raised an eyebrow. "Store security?" She shook her head. "Institutional security. I don't owe anything. It's all there in my documents." The police officer didn't like her tone. Maybe he was bothered by her calmness, her posture, the fact that she didn't lower her eyes, didn't humiliate herself. "You know, we got a call. They said someone with a backpack was prowling around the houses on this block. So you're stopping me because of a backpack?" "We're checking it out," he said gruffly. "Are you nervous?" "No, I'm irritated. Like anyone would be being treated as a suspect for no reason." The second officer got out of the car. He was younger, with a shaved head and restless eyes. He crossed his arms and eyed Evelyn suspiciously. "Is there a problem here?" he asked his colleague. "Nothing yet, but she's being evasive," the older man replied. Evelyn stood her ground. I'm answering everything, I'm just not smiling. Miss, the younger man said, stepping closer, that kind of attitude doesn't help at all. Do you have something to hide? Her eyes widened briefly, then blinked slowly. He knew exactly where this was going if he wasn't very careful. I don't. I already handed over my documents. You searched my backpack. Can I be on my way? The two officers looked at each other. The older man gestured with his chin. Let's take a look at her file. Are you checking me in a wanted system? Evelyn asked, surprised. Just because I'm walking down the street with a backpack? We're following protocol, the younger man said, turning his back to go to the police car. She crossed her arms, watching in silence. On that corner, under the clear sky and the song of a bird, Evelyn was handcuffed inside. That approach was not new. It was the same one she had seen happen to childhood friends, cousins, strangers. Now it was happening to her again. The older man continued with the documents in his hand, waiting for the return of the consultation. The younger man came back, shaking his head. Nothing. No record. Clean record. Like I said, Evelyn said, taking a small step forward. Can I go? The older officer took a while to answer. He seemed annoyed. Something in him wanted to find a loophole, wanted her to react. He wanted justification to impose even more, but there was none, and she wouldn't give it. After a moment, he returned the documents. Reluctantly, you can go, but avoid walking around here alone, okay? Evelyn calmly took her documents, put them away, and adjusted her backpack on her shoulders. This is my neighborhood, officer. I grew up here. I walk wherever I want. And she turned her back, walking with firm steps, without looking back. But deep down she knew. This wasn't over yet. They now knew her name. They were uncomfortable. And when ignorance meets power, the danger is constant. She still wouldn't call anyone. It wasn't time yet. But that morning, which had started calmly, had just planted the first seed of what would be an unforgettable turnaround. Before Evelyn Carter was stopped on a sidewalk like a common suspect, before her eyes learned to see danger even on routine patrols, there was a girl with tight braids, worn-out flip-flops, and a curious look, growing up in a forgotten corner of Virginia. The neighborhood where she was born was not pretty. Narrow streets, open sewers, exposed. Streetlights and schools where books arrived years late. The wooden house she shared with her mother and two younger brothers leaked on rainy days and was unbearably hot on sunny days. But inside, there was love, even if it was cramped, and a mother who carried the world on her shoulders. Evelyn's mother worked as a cleaning assistant in a hospital. She would leave before sunrise and return at night with sore feet, but always with the same message. If they want to make you look bad, prove that you are better, but without shouting, with study. Evelyn grew up hearing this phrase, as if she were swearing to herself. At school, she was not the most talkative, nor the most popular, but she was the most attentive. She sat in the front and wrote everything down. While her classmates got lost in the corridors of rebellion, she immersed herself in books, sometimes not for the love of knowledge, but for the need to escape from hunger, from the violence that lurked on every street corner, from the sirens that rang at night and kept her awake. One day, when she was 13, she saw a group of cadets marching through the city center for the first time. Their discipline mesmerized her. Their impeccable uniforms, their order, their strength. It was like a revelation. That same day, Evelyn came home and told her mother, "I want to join the army." Her mother, surprised, simply replied, "Then you will, but you will go through the front door with honor and you will be great." At 17, Evelyn got a scholarship to a military preparatory school. She left the neighborhood for the first time, far from her family, surrounded by classmates who came from completely different backgrounds. She had to learn to deal with suspicious looks, disguised jokes, and teachers who tried to put her behind. But Evelyn didn't back down. She learned faster than anyone else. She was the first to arrive, the last to leave, and she never complained. Her grades attracted attention. She received a letter of recommendation and got a place at the Federal Military Academy. There, prejudice was more organized, more subtle, but still present. In a class of 100, she was the only black woman. Still, she graduated in the top 5. After graduation, she went on international missions. She spent time at bases in Europe and in conflict zones in the Middle East. She participated in training with special forces and quickly rose through the ranks, always keeping to herself, always steadfast. She refused interviews, avoided social media, and kept her personal life completely private. To many, Evelyn was an enigma, but to those who really knew her, she was a rock. Her career was built on merit. Each achievement required double the sweat. Each promotion came with suspicion before applause. But she did not seek recognition. She sought excellence. And that was how she reached positions that few, very few, occupied, including men. She did not marry, did not have children, and dedicated her life to the mission of protecting and building. In each position, she made a point of keeping her feet on the ground. She made a habit of visiting public schools and talking to young people without fanfare, without cameras. "Don't see me as an example," she would say. "See me as proof." But despite all this curriculum, there was something she never managed to achieve: the right to be seen as an equal in all spaces. In many situations, like that ordinary morning in the neighborhood where she grew up, the invisible uniform of distrust still weighed more than all her medals. That was why Evelyn preferred to walk alone. Cap, sweatshirt, backpack, no insignia, no ostentation. She believed that if one day the country she served was truly fair, that should be enough for no one to stop her without reason. But the country was not ready yet, and she knew that better than anyone. What Evelyn did not imagine on that walk to the market was that her entire past, her entire journey from the alleys of the neighborhood to the most guarded halls of national security would have to come to light by force, and that the men who stopped her that morning would learn the hard way that there are silences more powerful than screams, and that there are women who, even without a uniform in sight, carry an entire army within themselves. For Evelyn Carter, that neighborhood was more than narrow streets and cramped houses. It was where she had learned to survive. Every corner brought back memories of a difficult childhood, but also of silent achievements. Returning there after so many years was like opening an old book. And that was exactly why she decided to visit that place without telling anyone, without an official car, without a uniform, without any insignia of power. Just her, a simple cap, a backpack, and the intention of reconnecting with the past. Time seemed to have stood still there. The sidewalk on the main street was still broken. The same old man sold flowers in front of his house, and the market on the corner still had the same faded paint. Evelyn walked slowly past each spot, observing in silence. Nostalgia was inevitable. She smiled when she saw the old tree from her childhood still standing, even if it was leaning to the side. There she had played with her brothers and neighbors, dreaming too big for someone who was too small. But there was also something different: the looks. As she walked, Evelyn felt the weight of eyes that didn't recognize her, or that recognized her and pretended not to see. A woman who had once been her neighbor looked at her suspiciously before closing the gate. A young man sitting on the steps of his house, holding a cell phone, observed her as if she were out of place. It was as if Evelyn no longer belonged there, not because of the change in class or reality, but simply because she was a black woman walking alone with a backpack on her back. It was the kind of presence that bothered those who never understood what it meant to grow up in a place where skin color always came before name. She entered the neighborhood grocery store, the same one she had visited when she was a girl. The smell of freshly baked bread was familiar. The owner, a middle-aged man, pretended not to recognize her. Evelyn greeted him politely. He responded with a curt nod. She picked up a few items: bread, a bottle of water, 2 packages of rice, and went to the cashier. The clerk, a young man, looked at her with some apprehension. "Ah, you paying in cash?" "Yes," she replied, handing over the bills. As she left, she saw 2 police officers standing on the corner. They were talking to a resident. One of them looked in her direction and then turned away, as if he had noticed something out of the ordinary. Evelyn felt a chill on the back of her neck. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. It was memory. It was the feeling that only those who have been followed inside a store or watched in an elevator understand. It was as if the simple fact of being there without a public explanation of who she was made her presence suspicious. She walked slowly, keeping her steps steady, didn't look at the police officers, but she knew they were watching her. She stopped in front of a specific house, that of Mrs. Hilda, an elderly woman who used to take care of her when her mother worked double shifts. She clapped her hands. There was no response. She knocked again. The door opened slowly. It was Mrs. Hilda, yes, but her eyes seemed blurred by time. "Yes?" "Mrs. Hilda, it's me, Evelyn." The lady frowned. After a few seconds, a smile appeared. "Girl, look how you've grown. Come in, come in." She went in. The smell of the house was the same, cheap soap and strong coffee. They sat down and talked. Evelyn told her without details that she was still working, that she missed that place, that she was just passing through. Mrs. Hilda touched her hand affectionately. "You've come a long way, daughter, but there are still people here who don't understand these twists and turns." "I've noticed," Evelyn replied bitterly. "It seems that the more we grow, the more we bother people. It's always been that way. But now you have a voice. You just can't lower it ever." They stayed there for a while longer. Evelyn thanked them, said goodbye, and started walking again. But when she turned the corner again, the same 2 police officers from before were there. One of them was talking on the radio. The other was walking toward her. She knew it was no coincidence. The officer watched her for a few seconds. Then he asked, "Is everything okay here, Mom?" "Yes, just visiting an old acquaintance." "Do you live here?" "I grew up here. Now I live 2 blocks away. Is everything okay with you? Do you feel safe?" She knew what that meant. It was the kind of question that seemed friendly but hid something else. "Do you belong here? Are you here with permission?" "I'm perfectly fine, officer, but thank you for your concern." He nodded, but continued to stare as if expecting something more. Evelyn took a step forward, waiting for him to move away. He didn't move. They sat in that uncomfortable silence for a few seconds. "Good morning, then," he said finally, and turned away. Evelyn kept walking. Her heart was pounding, her discomfort was clear. The feeling of being watched wouldn't leave her, and something inside her began to change, a restlessness, an old pain that was throbbing again. She knew how to recognize the smell of injustice. It was in the air, hovering, waiting for the next move. What she didn't know was that the next move would come sooner than she imagined. The afternoon progressed slowly, with the sun already beginning to set over the low houses in the neighborhood. Evelyn had decided to take one more walk before heading home. She wanted to stop by the school where she had studied, to revisit the public library where she had spent hours reading hidden from her classmates who had made fun of her for speaking properly. It was a kind of silent reconciliation with the past. She just didn't imagine that this walk would turn into a nightmare. At the intersection of Jefferson and E.T. Street, she noticed something strange. 2 white men were arguing on the other side of the street. One of them, agitated, was gesturing. Evelyn quickened her pace, avoiding eye contact. As she passed them, she heard one of the men say loudly, "Look, they're always lurking around, always with backpacks. I bet it's a mule or a smuggler." Evelyn felt her stomach turn, but she didn't respond. She kept walking. Silence was sometimes her only armor. Less than 2 minutes later, she heard the sound of tires screeching. 2 police cars appeared in a hurry, crossed the street and stopped a few meters away from her. Evelyn's heart pounded. She already knew. "Hey, you, lean against the wall now," one of the officers shouted as he opened the car door. She stopped, turned around carefully, and slowly raised her hands. "I have my hands free. What's going on?" "We received a report of suspicious activity. You were seen prowling houses and exchanging objects with a guy back there." "That's not true. I just passed 2 men arguing. I didn't talk to anyone." "Shut up and lean against the wall," the other younger officer interrupted. Now Evelyn hesitated. She could feel the eyes of neighbors, of children leaving the school nearby, of an old woman opening the curtain to peek in. Everything was in slow motion. A movie she had seen before, but this time she was in the lead role. She turned her back and leaned against the wall. The policeman approached and pulled her arms hard. "Are you resisting?" "No, I'm just balancing myself. You're hurting me." "Then cooperate," the older man said sarcastically. "Or would you rather get out of here and go straight to the police van?" Evelyn felt her wrists tighten in the handcuffs. The cold iron touched her skin. She closed her eyes for a second. She remembered her mother, her silent oath to never lower her head, but also to never ruin everything with an impulsive reaction. "There's no need for that," she murmured. "Oh, yes, you do. You have the profile." "Profile? What profile?" "We know that type. You walk alone, backpack on your back, wandering around residential neighborhoods. Do you think no one notices?" "I'm a citizen. I live 2 blocks away. I didn't do anything." "You'll explain that at the police station if you're lucky." The younger officer let out a muffled laugh. He made a point of speaking loudly. "I bet you're one of those people who learns about their rights on the internet and thinks they're in charge of the streets." Evelyn kept her eyes fixed on the ground. Her blood was boiling inside, but her posture was ice cold. She wouldn't give them what they wanted. She wouldn't scream. She wouldn't struggle. She wouldn't give them any excuse. "The documents are in my backpack, and you already approached me earlier today. Maybe we should remember that." "If she was approached, it's because she had a reason," the older man replied. "And apparently she's still with him." People began to stop discreetly to look. A young man crossed the street slowly, taking off his headphones. Evelyn noticed the movement but didn't react. A child holding her mother's hand asked loudly, "Mom, did she do something wrong?" The woman quickly pulled the child away and said almost in a whisper, "Stay still, son. These things are dangerous. These things." Evelyn felt the blow as if it were physical. The police officer holding the documents came back from the patrol car. "Nothing on record, but we'll take it for investigation anyway." "Investigate what exactly?" she asked. "Passive resistance, defensive attitude, profile consistent with suspicious activity." "Profile," she repeated bitterly. The other man added, "You may have a sharp tongue, but this isn't a court, ma'am. We're the ones in charge here." The word "ma'am" came out with mockery, Evelyn noticed. So that was the plan: intimidate, humiliate, and then say it was just a standard approach. She took a deep breath. The handcuffs were already hurting her wrists, her dignity even more so. She looked around. Some people looked with compassion, others with fear, no courage. In her head there was only one phrase: if they want to make you look like less, prove that you are more. But without shouting, with study. But at that moment, study was not enough. Neither was her composure. She had to wait, watch, and act at the right moment. One of the police officers opened the door of the police car. Evelyn was led in. They sat her in the back seat like any other criminal. No word was said about her rights. No explanation other than anonymous tip. Before closing the door, the police officer looked at her and said, "Are you going to put on your little show at the police station too?" Evelyn just stared at him, not angry, not afraid, but with something much more dangerous: certainty. She knew there would be consequences. Not now, not here, but there would be, because the world didn't know who she was yet. But it was about to find out. The back seat of the police car was cramped, and the seatbelt was worn and dirty. Evelyn's hands were still cuffed behind her back, which made the position uncomfortable. The car drove in silence through the narrow streets, while the two police officers spoke in code on the radio. She didn't say a word. She didn't beg. She didn't complain. She knew that any reaction here could be manipulated. Evelyn was used to keeping her cool, even in war zones. What were two small minds compared to a woman who had survived so much more? But at that moment, the issue wasn't just survival. It was teaching. It was turning the tables cleanly, directly, and relentlessly. When the police car stopped temporarily at a traffic light, Evelyn spoke in a tone that didn't ask. It was informing. "I need to make a call now." The two police officers looked at each other in the front seat. The younger one turned his head and laughed. "Of course. Do you want to call the lawyer or Datena?" Evelyn didn't change her tone. "I need to speak to my superior. It's a security protocol. If you ignore it, you'll be violating a federal rule." The older police officer was disconcerted. Her calm was annoying. "What protocol, ma'am?" "Class Omega. Internal military code. Find out or give me your cell phone and I'll let you know." "Code Omega? What's this nonsense?" "Make the call," she repeated firmly. The police officer hesitated. Evelyn knew this was out of their norm. They were used to dealing with screams, cries, apologies, but a woman in handcuffs wearing a cap, calm, speaking about federal protocols, caused discomfort, a fear disguised as mockery. "Okay," said the older man. "Let's see this superior of yours." He took out his cell phone, turned to her and said, "Tell me the number, but if you make it up, you'll make your situation worse." Evelyn dictated the number precisely, looking him in the eye through the rearview mirror. She rang twice. On the third call, someone answered in a firm, cold voice. "Central Command, identification, please." Evelyn, in a neutral voice, answered, "Contingency operation. General Carter in forced displacement. I request immediate verification." There was silence on the other end. Evelyn took advantage. "I am handcuffed. Condition of unjust detention. Location Arlington. Displacement in civilian vehicle. No legal reason. 2 local agents present. No resistance on my part. Situation under control for now." The operator's breathing became audible, and then he said, "Voice confirmation and code phrase, General." "Silence is also a command," she responded. The operator confirmed, "Understood. Stay online. Initiating tracking protocol. Team on the move." The two officers froze. The younger one turned around, confused. "What is this? Who was that?" Evelyn lifted her chin, even though she was handcuffed. "Central Command. The National Security Team is tracking this vehicle right now." The older one tried to hide his tension. "This is a prank, right?" But the car radio crackled. A voice they had never heard before sounded firm. "Arlington unit, identified as irregular transport. Request for immediate stop for verification. Coordinates transmitted. Stand by for intervention." The officer was livid. Is this the headquarters? Is this coming from higher up?" Evelyn remained silent. The car turned the corner. The radio continued to broadcast orders. Other patrol cars were being called, but not to reinforce the arrest, but to contain the situation that the two officers had caused. "Is she really who she says she is?" the younger one muttered. "That's not possible," the other replied, sweating. Evelyn finally spoke. "You made a mistake, and you still have a few minutes to decide whether you're going to make it worse or collaborate with the team that's coming." Silence. Neither of them knew what to do. No police protocol taught how to deal with a black woman, handcuffed, who was suddenly communicating with a federal-level control center and who spoke like someone used to leading battalions, not obeying commands. "Oh, come on, let's stop," the older one said hesitantly. They pulled the car over to the side of a wide avenue near a park. 2 minutes later, 4 black SUVs appeared, without sirens, without fanfare, but with a presence that commanded respect. Officers in dark suits got out, quick and purposeful. One of them walked straight up to the window of the patrol car. "Identify yourselves," he ordered. The officers showed their badges with shaking hands. The officer didn't answer, just wrote down the information, picked up a radio, and said something in a low voice. Evelyn was removed from the car. The handcuffs were carefully removed by one of the officers. She adjusted her sweatshirt and backpack and stood up. The leader of the federal team looked her in the eye and said, "Everything is under control now, General. Shall we accompany you?" She didn't answer, just walked to the SUV with intact dignity. Before getting in, she looked over her shoulder at the two officers. They were standing there, pale, hunched over, not knowing what to say, but Evelyn didn't need to say anything either. That image was enough. She got into the car, the door closed softly, and in that moment, the game had changed. The mood changed the moment the black SUVs appeared. No sirens, no strobe lights, but with a precision that gave off chills. They stopped like a silent squad, organized, imposing. The street, previously noisy with horns and conversations, fell into an eerie silence. Evelyn had been removed from the local police car. She was standing with her backpack on her back, her hands finally free. The officer who uncuffed her kept his head slightly lowered in respect. The two officers who had arrested her were still standing there. They didn't know whether to speak, to justify themselves, or simply to disappear. The older man was sweating visibly. The younger man seemed paralyzed, his eyes fixed on the ground. A man in a dark suit got out of the middle SUV, his gaze firm, the kind of presence that speaks louder than any voice. He approached, looked directly at Evelyn and simply said, "General, are you okay?" She nodded. No physical assault, just exposure and embarrassment. The man immediately turned to the two officers. "Can you gentlemen explain to me the basis of which federal protocol this arrest was carried out?" The older man stammered, "We got a tip. A suspect walking around the neighborhood. Backpack." She didn't identify herself clearly. "She identified herself with official documents," the agent snapped. "Yes, but it looked fake. It looked too good." The agent didn't answer. He snatched the radio from his shoulder and spoke in a neutral tone. "Central. Confirm identity. Record for General Evelyn Carter, code Alpha Delta 394. A clear voice answered on the other end. "Confirmed. Active identity. High ranking. Level 11 clearance. Unblemished record." The agent turned to the police officers and crossed his arms. "Mrs. Carter is one of the people responsible for coordinating national security in 5 states, led by 2 street cops without a warrant, without an order, without justification. This constitutes abuse of authority and arbitrary detention." The police officers didn't know where to hide their faces. Evelyn remained silent. Every second of that embarrassment was a kind of silent justice. She didn't scream, she didn't ask for punishment, she just watched. And that hurt more than any scream. 2 federal agents arrived with clipboards and wrote down everything: the officer's details, the vehicle's identification, the time of the stop. Neither of them spoke. It was as if the law was being enforced right there on the asphalt. "Where are the images?" "From the vehicle's camera," asked one of the federal agents. "They haven't been downloaded yet," replied the younger one. "They will be downloaded now. All footage from this patrol will be formally requested. You must remain at their disposal for internal investigation. Your superiors have already been notified." That sentence was the final straw. Evelyn finally spoke. "I don't want you to be treated with hatred. I just want you to understand the weight of every decision you make while wearing that uniform." The silence grew even heavier. The federal agent concluded, "General, your transportation is ready. Would you prefer to go with the team, or would you like to return to your residence with an escort?" "I'll go with you, and then I'll talk to my lawyer." She got into the SUV, taking her time. No glory, no declared revenge, just the firm feeling that she had regained her dignity and shown, without having to raise her voice, who she was. As the car drove off, The two police officers remained motionless. They had learned the hard way that misused authority exacts a high price, and the neighborhood, which had previously witnessed yet another routine stop, was now watching the outcome of something much bigger, without shouting, without scandal, but with every detail echoing where it hurt most, in their conscience. When Evelyn Carter got into the official SUV, the silence inside the vehicle said more than any words. The officers were tense but respectful. None of them treated her as their superior, not out of fear, but out of reverence. It was like leading a historic authority who had been wounded in a public square, and everyone knew it. In the back seat, as the car headed toward the federal headquarters in Washington, Evelyn kept her eyes fixed on the window. She passed by ordinary streets, shops, squares, everything the same. But inside, something had changed forever. At the security center, the internal protocol was already underway. The name, Evelyn Carter, circulated among sectors, offices, and private rooms. Many knew her from reports, others from strategic meetings, some just by reputation, and that was enough. She wasn't just anyone. Her dossier, organized and frighteningly impeccable. Daughter of a single woman, military education with honors, training at American and Allied bases, participation in high-risk missions in the Middle East, emergency response coordinator in critical security events, responsible for the integration of civilian and military units in humanitarian actions, Medal of Honor recipient, specialist in strategic intelligence, active member of 3 national security councils, direct trust of the White House in cases of crisis, and perhaps most importantly, without a single incident on her record. No misconduct, no complaints, no administrative failure in more than 20 years of service. When Colonel Henry Clay, her direct superior, learned of the incident, he immediately interrupted a cabinet meeting, personally, called the officer who rescued her, and demanded a real-time report. "Was she handcuffed?" he asked incredulously. "Yes, sir. Handcuffed on the street, without a warrant, without a legal explanation. Arrest on a generic charge based on a verbal complaint." On the other end of the line, silence. And then a single sentence. "This will not go unpunished." Meanwhile, in the Police Conduct Division of the City of Arlington, her name began to echo among superiors in the force. The 2 officers involved were silent in a private room, waiting for instructions from above, but their faces already said it all. The expression of those who understood too late who they had dealt with. The patrol's direct superior, Lieutenant Marcos Eldred, read Evelyn Carter's file twice, then read it again, ran his hand over his face, and finally got up from his chair with a single thought. They had ended their own careers. Evelyn, on the other hand, refused any special reception. When she arrived at the operations center, she asked for a glass of water and a moment alone. She went into a private room, sat down, took off her cap, and ran her hand over her face. She didn't cry, but let the tension slowly leave her, like someone taking off armor after a long battle. Minutes later, Colonel Clay entered and closed the door behind him. There was no guard, no protocol, only respect. "Evelyn," she stood up straight. "Sir, I honestly have no words." "Neither do I, Colonel, but I have a lot to say." "Just not today." Clay nodded. He was visibly shaken. "Do you want this to go to the High Council?" She thought for a moment. "I want it to go where it needs to go. Not to get revenge, but to prevent it from happening to me or anyone else again." "Will it happen?" he asked. "I guarantee it." She sat back down. The colonel walked to the door, but before he left, he turned around. "For everything you represent, today, more than ever, you made history, just not in the way you deserved." And she left. Hours later, the internal channels of the armed forces and national security were already discussing the case as a priority. The discussion was not just about Evelyn. It was about the system, about the protocols that allowed people like her to be treated so frivolously just for being out of uniform. Evelyn's resume was not just a resume, it was a shield that had been ignored. A story of overcoming obstacles that was crushed that day by two men who believed they had the right to act above the law. But the system, although slow, was beginning to react. Reports were filed, an investigation was initiated. The officers' superiors were summoned. The case moved up a level, and Evelyn, who had not asked for punishment, was now the focus of a change in conduct. She didn't need to say who she was. Now the whole country knew. Within 24 hours of the incident, Evelyn Carter's case was no longer just a mishandling of the case. It was an institutional failure in an era of strict protocols and mandatory training. The mere mention of her name, coupled with the term detainee, raised alarm bells throughout the chain of command. The atmosphere at Arlington Police Station was tense. The two officers involved, Thompson and Riker, were officially placed on leave pending conduct review, but they knew that the term was just a formality. That analysis would not be light or brief. They spent the morning in a closed room, being heard by two immediate superiors and an observer from the Internal Affairs Department. At first, they tried to justify the action based on the verbal complaint and the evasive behavior of the citizen they approached, but the first objective question was enough to dismantle the speech. And what exactly was the evasive behavior? She walked slowly, alone, avoiding eye contact. Is that evasion, or just someone walking in peace? Thompson had no answer. Riker, who had been trying to maintain his composure, began to sweat visibly. The inspector, a stern-faced woman, flipped through a report in front of them and asked, "Did you check her documents?" "Yes, but they looked fake, very sophisticated." Military documents are sophisticated, especially those of high-ranking officers. You're trained to recognize that. Why did you ignore them? No answer, just silence. Meanwhile, at the National Security Headquarters, the General Command had already issued an internal note, not for the press, not for the networks, but for all sectors involved with public security forces. The unjustified detention of General Evelyn Carter, an active officer with high-level access, constitutes a serious violation of conduct and will be treated with the necessary rigor. Corrective measures are underway. This message, short and direct, resonated strongly among generals, squadron chiefs, and regional officers. Evelyn's name now became a symbol of an institutional warning. Respect for the hierarchical structure could not be relativized by personal prejudices. In the meantime, Evelyn remained in seclusion, as she had requested. No interviews, no presentations, just waiting. She received calls from high-ranking colleagues, all of them dismayed. One of them, in particular, moved her. A former commander, now retired, with whom she had served on a mission in Iraq. "When I found out what they did to you, I felt ashamed." "Don't be. This is bigger than us." "Yes, and that's why it needs to change. Thank you for not keeping quiet." She hung up with tears in her eyes, not because of the suffering, but because she finally felt that her silent fight, built up over decades, was leading to concrete action. At the headquarters of the Internal Affairs Department, the investigation was moving forward. Within 2 days, it became clear that the police officers had acted without any technical justification. No recordings indicated any suspicious behavior on Evelyn's part. On the contrary, the videos of the approach showed calm, cooperative, and firm. The agent superiors were also called. One of them, in a defensive tone, alleged that the team was not adequately prepared to deal with high-profile civilians. The response from the Internal Affairs Department was direct. The problem is not the lack of preparation, it is the excess of prejudice. A few days later, a meeting was called at the regional police headquarters. Evelyn was invited to attend. She entered the room with the same posture as always, straight, calm, without ostentation. She was wearing civilian clothes, sneakers, and no makeup, but her presence filled the room. The regional director, a gray-haired and experienced man, stood up when he saw her enter. General Carter, on behalf of the institution, I want to apologize for what happened. And more important than words, I want to reaffirm that action is being taken. She nodded. I don't expect speeches. I expect reforms, procedures that will prevent the next person to be unfairly handcuffed from being a 16-year-old boy or a mother picking up her child from school. We are listening and we will act. Evelyn thanked her. She said few words, did not ask for exemplary punishments, but suggested a review of approach training, the use of the term suspect, and reports without prior verification. She was heard and respected. As she left the room, she heard one of the command chiefs mutter to another, "She doesn't talk much, but when she does, she changes everything." The following week, the two officers were formally suspended and transferred to administrative duties. It wasn't a scandal, there were no headlines, but everyone within the force knew what it meant. Evelyn, for her part, returned to work discreetly, but the message had been sent. She was no exception. She was a symbol, and her case now served as a transitional milestone to something bigger. In the internal affairs file, the report ended with an unusual sentence. Case closed, measures applied. General Evelyn Carter maintained exemplary and collaborative conduct at all stages. Her stance will be used as a model in internal training. And so, without shouting, without appearing on the front pages of newspapers, without having to knock anyone down with her own hands, she changed an entire system, with firmness, with dignity, with strength that cannot be seen but can be felt. The auditorium was simple, functional, with light grey walls, chairs lined up, and a respectful silence in the air. There were about 120 people in the room, officers of various ranks, heads of police units, psychologists, internal affairs agents, and instructors from training academies. It was not a public event. No cameras, no journalists, just civil servants gathered to listen to someone who had gone through the system and survived without losing her elegance. Evelyn Carter was invited to close the conference on conduct, approach, and operational justice. She was reluctant at first. She did not like speeches. She had always preferred practice. But something deep inside her told her that she had to go, not for herself, but for all the time she had seen people being silenced. She took the stage without a uniform, as she insisted on. She wore a white shirt and dark dress pants, a cap in her hand. She walked to the podium with firm steps, looked at the audience for a moment, and then began. "A few weeks ago, I was handcuffed in the neighborhood where I grew up for nothing, without a warrant, without a crime, without an explanation, just for carrying a backpack and looking like something that, in the eyes of two armed men, seemed wrong." The room was completely silent. Not a sound, not a cough, not a whisper. "I'm not the first, and unfortunately, I won't be the last. But I may be one of the few who finally had someone to listen to her side of the story, and that's exactly the problem." She paused briefly, took a breath, and continued. "When I joined the army, they said I had to be twice as good to be seen as half as capable. I was 3 times as good. I did more courses, more missions, more sacrifices. I reached a place few reach, but all it took was a cap and a backpack for me to be treated like no one else." Some officers crossed their arms, others lowered their eyes. Evelyn kept her tone calm, without anger, without rehearsed speech. She spoke as someone who carries scars, not as someone looking for an audience. "When they handcuffed me, I didn't scream, I didn't curse, I didn't ask for mercy. I just stood firm, because I learned that at certain times silence is the most powerful weapon, and that day, my silence spoke for thousands who never had the chance to be heard." A highway patrol officer in the 3rd row discreetly wiped his eyes. "I'm not here to call for punishment or to teach anyone how to do their job. I'm here to remind you of what some may have forgotten. Every person you stop has a story, a past, a dignity. And when you choose to handcuff someone for no reason, you're not just restraining their wrists, you're suffocating the humanity that should exist within the uniform you wear." The silence was now thick, palpable. Many kept their eyes fixed on her. Others stared at the ground, but everyone listened. "I still believe in justice. That's why I didn't fight back. That's why I didn't seek the spotlight. But I refuse to accept that my color, my posture, or my neighborhood are sufficient reason for a police car to stop next to me with its siren blaring." She exhaled firmly and concluded, "I am Evelyn Carter. But before that, I am the daughter of a black woman who cleaned hospital hallways without being noticed. I am the sister of 2 boys who grew up hearing that they would be arrested before they were 20, and I am part of a nation that is still afraid to face its own truth. May my case serve as a lesson, but may the lesson not only be about me, but about everyone, about justice, about respect, about seeing the human being before any assumptions." And he ended with something that left everyone silent for several seconds. "Because the day appearance is more important than essence, we will all be handcuffed." The audience remained silent for a few moments, until an agent from the training sector stood up, followed by others. It was not an explosive applause. It was slow, respectful, a recognition of the soul. Evelyn stepped off the stage as calmly as ever, but there, at that moment, her voice had broken through walls that had seemed insurmountable for years. She had not destroyed anyone. She had not demanded trophies, but without raising her voice, she had become a symbol of strength, respect, and change. Evelyn Carter never asked to be an example. She did not dream of making headlines, nor did she want to be remembered for an injustice. Her story was built in silence, brick by brick, away from the spotlight. She overcame invisible barriers. She ignored those who said she didn't belong there and got where almost no one else does. And when the world tried to reduce her to her appearance, she responded with poise, because true strength isn't shouting louder, it's resisting without being corrupted. What happened to Evelyn is not an exception. It's a reflection, a reminder that every day thousands of people are judged by what they wear, the color of their skin, the way they walk, the neighborhood where they live. Not everyone has a direct line to high command. Not everyone can prove that they are more than they think. But Evelyn showed that it is possible to win without becoming what they tried to impose on her. Her greatest victory was not being removed from the patrol car. It was getting out of there without losing her soul. She did not humiliate. She did not seek revenge. She taught. And this teaching echoes to this day in training rooms, in uniforms, in consciences that were previously dormant but were awakened by her unshakable calm. Perhaps Evelyn Carter saved other lives that day, not with weapons, not with orders, but with the courage to respond to the absurd with wisdom. And the question that remains is, how many Evelyns are still ignored, silenced, invisible out there? How many stories are interrupted before they even begin? Just because someone decided they don't have the right profile. If this story touched you, made you think or reflect, share it in the comments. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar? How do you think the world can change when someone chooses firmness instead of fury? And, of course, if you want to follow more moving and transformative stories like this one, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and don't miss the next stories. Here the truth finds a voice, and justice always finds a way to appear in the end.